Here's a tutorial for how to play Fallout Wasteland Warfare. This is a miniatures game, and I'm going to go through page by page the rule of play, the rule book, and that way you can learn. And I think that they have set it up really well, where you learn some of the rules and then you play a scenario, you learn a couple more rules, and then you play the next scenario. So that's how I'm going to go through the tutorial, is go section by section, because there are a lot of rules to remember. This is not a streamlined game. This is a crunchy, lots of rules, lots of cards and components and chits kind of game. And so let's go ahead and dive in and follow the rule book the way that it was written. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start off on page 10. And here it first explains skill tests, and skill tests are pretty easy. Let's go ahead and take a look at Nora here, and these are all the skills. These are from the video game. And let's say she's making an attack where she is shooting her gun, which uses perception. She needs a 5 or lower on the white die, and so you go ahead and just roll that. X means that you automatically miss and whiff. And so here she rolled an 8, and 8 obviously is higher than 5, so she would fail. You need to roll equal to or lower than that number. The various faces on the die is explained here. You have numbered faces. The cog is an action point. The exclamation is a critical point. And then you have 2 chances of X's and a fail. The X with the cog gives you an action point even though you failed to hit. But for the first scenario, all of these, the action point and the critical points, are going to be automatic hits. And so don't worry about the action point and critical point. We'll talk about that later. The other dice are the black ones, which is a damage die, gives you extra damage. The green die is to help you hit. The minus modifies the roll. So if she rolled a 2, this would become a 6. The yellow die mostly takes away armor of the target, and then the blue die gives you special effects, and I'll explain all of those later. The important thing on page 12 is talking about unique units, and so if on the card it has this symbol, then you can only have one of those units in your army. And so Dogmeat, you can only have one of those. Settlers, you can have multiples, and you only have one card that represents all of the settlers that are on the board, and so that card represents these two. Nora is a unique, so is Dogmeat. So the game structure, the game plays in rounds, and here's one of the unique things that I like about this game, and that's how you activate the models. You have the option of readying your model by placing one of these icons. So if it's my turn, let's say I go ahead and ready Dogmeat, but I choose not to activate because I want to wait and see what the opposing team is going to do before I act. And so I'll go ahead and ready, but not activate Dogmeat, and then I'll pass it over to the opposing player, and they can choose to do the same. Let's say that they ready this super mutant, but wants to wait and see what this side does. So then it goes back to this side, and let's say I'm going to go ahead and ready Nora, but again, I sort of want to wait and see what this side is going to do, so it switches back over, and then I ready my brute, but at this point I go ahead and choose to activate. And when you choose to activate, you activate all of your readied models. You can't opt not to activate one of the models that are ready. So I would go ahead and choose which one I want to do first. Let's say I want to shoot first, so I'll go ahead and activate him and shoot, and then once his turn is over, I activate my brute, and let's say he tries to move in. Of course, you can go ahead in your same turn, ready, and then activate a model, but I think that's a unique mechanic of this game. So on page 14, it talks about the types of actions that you can take, and so each round, every model that you activate can take 2 actions, and you can repeat the actions as well. And so you can do 2 move actions, 2 shoot actions, or any combination of these, and you have to finish one action before you move on to the second one. And so the rule book goes through each one of these different action types. The first one talks about move, and this is relatively simple, and so the game uses these range rulers that are color-coded, And if you look at your card, so again, let's take a look at Nora. This first sort of what looks like a play symbol is how much they can move with a regular move action. Dogmeat, obviously, as a dog, has a red move, and so if we choose to move him twice, we can go like this. And this is one of, again, a unique feature. Most war games, when you're moving characters, you move them from the front of the base to the front of the base, like this. But in this game, you actually go the full length so that the model, the base of it, ends up beyond the range ruler. And so I can do that twice. And most of the characters, like the mutants here, as well as the human survivors, they have a base movement of a yellow. And so they move across like this. Now, one of the things about terrain, if you have to go through difficult terrain, and that's any obstacles that are in your way, your range goes one less than your original movement value. And so one less than yellow is orange, and so if I'm trying to get around this thing, I have to use orange if I'm moving through difficult terrain or any obstacle. So here, I would barely make it over this bench. Also, this limitation says that models cannot pass through opposing models, but they can pass through friendly models, but they can't end their movement overlapping their bases. Alright, on page 16 it talks about the shoot action. So you can use an action to go ahead and shoot, and you look for the shoot icon, which is like this. And it isn't always on perception, so each unit has different places where these icons are pertaining to the stat that you're going to use. Also, the weapon that you have needs to correlate and have the same symbol as your shoot, which is typically a rifle. So let's go ahead and take a look at the settler as an example of a shoot action. So we'll go ahead and use these two settlers, and they're going to try to shoot these mutants. Now, the first thing you want to look at is the stats for the weapon that you're using. And so here the settlers have a hunting rifle, and you see two different range rulers. The first one is within short range. If you're rolling to hit within short range, you add these 2 die. If you're rolling for long range, then you add 2 green die instead of 2 yellow die. And so in this circumstance here, you see that this first mutant is within short range, which is the blue. And so here I would roll my white die, and I would grab 2 yellow die and basically roll. And they need a perception of 6 in order to hit. We do get a -1, but it only brings it down to 9, and so this would be considered a miss. Let's say though she uses her second shoot action to try to hit this guy back here. And so obviously the long range is with a blue and a black, and that is plenty of range. And so she would roll, instead of 2 yellow die, 2 green die. And let's see what she gets here. Oh, so she got a cog, which counts as a 1. And these would have helped hit if she would have rolled, let's say she would have rolled an 8. Normally that would miss, but because she needs a 6, but it minuses 2 to that total, so that would be a successful hit. But because she rolled the cog, which counts as a 1, that is a hit. Here on page 17, it explains line of sight as well as line of cover. They are 2 different things. So how do you know whether or not you have line of sight to a figure? Is anywhere on the base has to be visible and have a straight line to the base of the target that you are attacking. And so here, obviously, they have line of sight. Same here. Even Nora, who's hiding behind the wall, she has line of sight to this character. They both do to each other because her base is peeking out and base to base can be seen. So those are all legitimate targets as long as they have line of sight, base to base. Line of cover determines whether or not there's a cover bonus for the defender. And here, you, instead of going base to base, any section of the base, you go center of the model to center of model. And so here what we see is this line shooting at this guy passes through this obstacle. And so this character, the target, actually gains a bonus of both a -2 to the shooter's ability, and so her perception changes from a 6 to a 4, so it becomes harder to roll to hit because of the obstacle. And that's cumulative. Let's say the bench was here on this side too. So every obstacle that the line of cover passes through, it's an additional -2. So these two obstacles would bump this down to a 2. Not only that, but if there is an obstacle, the target's armor value increases by 1. But that's not cumulative. It only happens no matter how many obstacles are there, still the bonus is only an applied +1 to armor. Also, friendlies do not count as cover. So let's say this guy actually had a gun. The brute actually doesn't, but let's say he does, and he has to shoot through his friendly in order to hit her. He would not count as cover because it's a friendly. But the other way around, if she was trying to hit him, he would count as cover. Nora over here, who is hiding behind the wall, you can see center to center, this counts as cover. But because she is touching the obstacle, it does not count as a minus when she's trying to hit this guy. So as long as you're touching the cover and you still have line of sight base to base, you gain the advantage of where if he was trying to hit Nora, he would have a minus to his hit, but she doesn't because she's behind this wall. All right, so on page 18, there's a little bit of confusing rules about elevation advantage. So basically what it's saying is as long as a model is orange, at least orange in height, it gains an elevated advantage. And if it is at least an orange away from the edge, anything below it does not have line of sight to that character. And so right now, he does not have line of sight to her because she is more than orange away from the significant edge. And she doesn't either to him. She has to be within the orange to have line of sight and vice versa. Also, the other rule is that when they have elevated advantage, only obstacles that are within orange of the defender counts as an obstacle. So here, even though the bench is in between the shooter and the defendant, only this piece of terrain counts because it's within orange. Okay, on page 19 it explains how damage works, and it's pretty simple. So let's say this settler was shooting at this mutant, and again, it's within short range, so need to roll this. She needs a 6, and will hit because she got a 4. That's armor, reduction in armor. Doesn't really need that because she already rolled underneath her 6. So that's a successful hit, and you just look at the weapon, and that does 2 points of physical damage. So these different symbols here show that that's physical, the shield is physical, the lightning bolt is energy, and that's radiation damage. And so that's 2 points of physical damage. What we do is we go over here to the super mutant, and we can see here that he normally has 1 point of armor for physical. But because she rolled a -1, it takes away that armor, and so now he has 0, so he actually doesn't roll and will take the full 2 points of damage. Now, let's say that she didn't roll that this -1 here on the armor. He needs to roll a 1 on the red die, but he rolled a 2. He needs to roll a 1 or lower, whatever his armor value is. And if he had rolled a 1, then that would reduce this 2 points of damage down to 1. So you subtract whatever your success roll is. Let's look over here at the brute. Let's say that that same weapon shot him and does 2 points of damage. And if he rolled a 1, even though his value is 2, he succeeds, but he only takes away 1 point of damage. So he would still take 1 total point of damage. If he rolled a 2, he would cancel all of them. If he rolled a 3 or above, his armor doesn't come into play, and he would take all 2 points of damage. Let's say rather than her making the shot, it was her that had made the shot. So with the same roll, because she's shooting through cover, and this sort of, because it's all clustered together, let's say that counts as 1 piece of cover, he automatically gets 1 more point of armor as well as her getting a -2. And so she would have needed a 4, still would have passed. And let's say she still rolled this. When we go back to Super Mutant, because he was undercover, his armor would change to a 2. But this would, again, reduce it back down to 1. So that's how cover works. Also, how many hit points do the characters have? What you want to do is you want to look for the heart symbol. And for most characters, it's going to be their endurance. If you look over here at Dogmeat, his heart symbol and hit points is determined by his agility. And so he has 8 hit points. The Super Mutant here has 6 hit points. The Brute has 8. And so you just basically take these wound markers and you place them next to them. And once they take that number of wounds, they're taken off the board. It also explains here on page 19 how you assign damage. So the important thing to know is that radiation damage comes from physical damage, where you flip it over. And I'm not going to explain all of that. You can go ahead and read it here. It's a little bit complicated. But when you heal radiation damage, it doesn't go away. You flip it back over to a regular physical damage. That's probably the most important part that you need to know. Page 20 talks about special effects. The only character that you're going to see in the beginning tutorial missions that has special effects is Dogmeat. So when we look at his bite, you see these various symbols here, and he does roll a blue die along with a yellow and a green. And so this is the nuclear symbol. If he successfully hits a character, he will also cripple them. If he rolls a star, it means he gets an action point. If he rolls a cola, it would take away their reaction marker. Page 21 goes a little bit into armor, and specifically talks about power armor. There are cards that you slot in next to your unit cards, and if you see a bonus that says 3 plus something, 3 is your base armor for that damage type, but the +1 means that you will always block 1 point of damage, regardless of whether or not you make your armor save. Page 23 talks about another action that you can take, which is a charge. And this is where you use the second movement color to show you how far you can move. So let's go ahead and take a look at our Super Mutant that is yellow and has a charge value of red. And so here you can see that he's not within red of Dogmeat, but he can use his first action just to do a regular move, which is yellow. And that will actually put him within charging range, which is red. And so for a second action, he's going to declare a charge and go right in base to base. Now you can only charge as long as you aren't already in melee or base to base with an enemy. When you charge, you get to pick to have an additional green die or a black die the next time you do a melee attack to the person that you charged. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick black because I want to increase my damage output. But my turn is over because I already did 2 actions, so this will be a reminder the next time I activate him that I have that bonus. The bottom of the page is telling you that you do need line of sight in order to charge a target. So how does close combat work? Close combat is relatively the same as ranged attacks. Let's go ahead and look at our Brute here, who is a close combat specialist. And we look at his sledgehammer, which is a melee weapon signified by this dagger. So we look up here and he uses his strength ability in order to hit. One of the rules here that's important to remember is that any model with a total strength of 7 or more adds a 1 bonus black die to that melee weapon attack. So that's an easy thing to forget. The Brute right now is the only one who has 7 or more, and so he's going to add an additional black die. So with this attack, what he does is, obviously there's no range, so he's going to roll 2 yellow die in addition to the white hit die. He's going to roll a black die because he's strength 7 or more. And then finally, because he's successfully charged and I chose the black one, I'm going to add another black die to the roll. And so he is rolling all of these dice. So because he's strength 8, he's going to go ahead and hit, and look at how much damage he's doing. Also blocking 3 points of armor, and then an additional 3 points of damage on top of the 2 here. So we take a look at Dogmeat's stats. He does have 2 armor. That's totally taken away by the -3. So he has no armor. And then with a total of 5 damage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so Dogmeat doesn't even get a save roll, and his hit points, he's reduced down to 3. So we add that marker showing that he took 5 points of damage. 2 important things to note about close combat. The first is, what do you do with a unit that doesn't have a close combat weapon? So for example, this settler here only has a hunting rifle. Well, not to fret, every single model does have this base close combat skill, which is rolling a green die and inflicting 1 damage. So even if they don't have a weapons card for close combat, that's a skill that you can use. Also, the other thing that's available is the use of ranged weapons in close combat. So the settler would be able to use the hunting rifle in close combat, but it is made at a -2 hit. So instead of her strength value of being 3, it would be at -2, so she would need to roll a 1, which is very hard to do. And also the armor rating of the target is increased by 1. Bottom of the page talks about what happens if there are multiple models against the target. They gain a green die, an extra green die. So in this circumstance, if either of these mutants are attacking Dogmeat, they're going to have an additional green die. And after you use the bonus die for charging, you take it away for any other subsequent attacks. So page 25 talks about a special free move after a close combat attack. You don't have to succeed, but you are able to do what's called a slide movement. As long as you stay within base to base, you can slide around in case you want to lock up this character so that they're not shooting at you. Also, during Dogmeat's turn, let's say that he's feeling like he's too wounded. He is able to withdraw with his base movement speed, but with every enemy that's a base to base with Dogmeat gets a free attack. It doesn't require an action from them, and so they immediately get a free attack while Dogmeat is retreating, so that's risky. So the final page in this section talks about shooting into engaged models. So let's say this survivor is trying to shoot at the brute. When you're trying to shoot into a group of engaged units, you get a +2 to your hit. And so her perception goes up to an 8 in order to hit, because the target as a total is easier to hit. But there's a chance that you could hit your friendly. And the way that you determine how you hit is, first you go ahead and roll your die, which in this case would be this. And so because she rolled a 7, but because of the -1 and +2, she hits. What you calculate now is, who do you hit? And how you do this is you grab these points, I think these are searchables, and you start off with your target. And so let's say your target was a super mutant, you put a 1 down there. Then you go around in a circle, you put a 2, and then a 3 there, and then you swing back to the first target and you put the 4 there. After you place those markers, you roll the red defense die, and in this case, she would have hit Dogmeat. So now's the point that you go ahead and try out tutorial 1 out of the quest book and use and implement all of the rules that you've learned so far. Again, ignore the symbols, but the cogs and the critical are all just count as 1. All right, so the next section is talking about using your expertise as an action. So it does take an action to use your computer skill, your lockpick, your search, and your presence. And if you look at your card, it will show you what skills that you can take. So the settler is able to do the search skill in addition to the she can't do lockpick, but she can do computer skill. And her presence, I also don't see presence. Oh, there it is right there. Her presence is green, range green. So on page 29, it talks about scavenging, and you scavenge investigation markers as well as searchable. So let's first talk about investigation markers, which are these guys right here. You will look at your unit's searching range, which for Nora, this is the black ruler right here. For example, Settler, she would use a green ruler, and as well as the super mutants are green. So when Nora stops her movement or begins her movement, whenever, she can look at any of the investigation markers that are on the board that is at least within black. So in this circumstance, she would be able to search this token, but she would not be able to search this token because it's beyond her range. She also would not be able to search that token because it is behind cover and she does not have line of sight. Remember, in order to have line of sight, it has to be base to base. So if it was peeking around the corner there, then she would have line of sight. What you do is once you have line of sight, you can look at them. You don't want to show your opponent. This is a blank, so there's nothing there. This would be number 6, and the scenario themselves will tell you what the numbers represent. And then again, that would remain hidden, but if she were in range, this would become a searchable marker. The theory behind it is that you're able to see these items, and therefore you at least know what they are beforehand and determine whether or not you're going to make the attempt to walk across and engage with the item. It does not take an action to look at these, but you have to do it after you finish and in between any other actions that you take. In contrast, searchable markers, you have to be base to base with them in order to flip them over to see what they are. And so the searchable markers look like this, have a little tool chest, and let's say Nora makes her move. She is able to take a look at these ones, the ones that she's within her sight range, but these ones she has to come base to base. Once she uses an action to move and becomes base to base, she can look at the marker without using an action. Unless it is one of these skull and crossbones, you have to immediately interact with that. An interaction does not take an action to do. And so when you draw a skull and crossbones and there's one other token that is like that, you draw a card from the danger card and you resolve it. And so here's an example of that. Some of these other ones, this means you can pick up an item from the item deck. Ones like this require a skill test, and this is where you do need to use an action in order to try to see if you can pass the skill. And so this means lockpick, and so for Nora, her lockpick skill is right here and uses agility. She would just roll this die and that would count as a 1, and therefore she would pass. And here are the stipulations saying if you pass, you pick up an item. If you don't pass, if you fail, you still pick up an item, but you have to resolve one of the danger cards from the deck. It is possible, if this had been the token that she had looked at, for her to choose not to interact with it. So after coming base to base, she takes a look, says, no, I don't want to do that. Or the mutants who actually don't have a lockpick skill, they can take a look at this and then decide, I'm not interacting, and flip it back down and just sort of ignore it and move on. Page 32 talks about various items that you can pick up, and probably the most important part about the items is that some of them are limited use. In other words, you use them once and you throw them away. So your alcohol, your chems, your food and drink, as well as gear, and that will be signified up here. So for example, if you want to use Nuka-Cola, you get to throw away or heal 3 wounds, but you do add 1 radiation token. And you also gain an action. The other important thing is when you attach one of these to a unit's card that represents more than one model, for example, the Settler, these are uniques. These are units that are represented by a group. The entire group has access to the Nuka-Cola. Obviously, only one of them can use it if you have only one Nuka-Cola, but they have access. Every model in this group has access to those items. That isn't true with weapons. Obviously, if you find a gun, you can't have that gun be given to everyone in the group. It's just whichever model finds that gun is equipped with that gun. Page 33 talks about items that diminish over time, and so these are put next to your unit card, and each round you just slide it over so that the effects diminish over time. I'll let you go ahead and read this page, but that's pretty self-explanatory. So at this point, go ahead and stop and try tutorial number 2. The scenario focuses on the skills that you just learned in terms of searching for items and using them. Alright, the next page on 36 talks about the Battlecry, which is a type of charge action that you can take. And so remember, the normal charge is determined on this brute by his green, which is plenty of space, but he would be reduced down to red because he's crossing over difficult terrain. That's plenty of space to charge. But if he chooses to Battlecry, you first have to look at the card and look for this little fist and what color it is. The color shows you what range he has for doing Battlecry. So in this case it's yellow, and here he does have the distance to be able to close in. But again, because he's crossing difficult terrain, he reduces one size and is in orange. And fortunately for him, he still has enough room to get base to base with Nora. So that Battlecry will be successful. How you resolve Battlecry is you look at this ability, and his skill is 8, and you look at the charged Battlecry model and see if they also have a fist. If they do, they are able to oppose it, and for her it's tied to her charisma skill of 5. So she would first roll to see if she can roll 5 or lower. She she doesn't. And then the brute also has to see if he can roll an 8 or lower, which he does. So he is successful in charging. Therefore, the benefit of a charge is that he is able to have both a black and a green bonus die when determining his 2 hit. And so he'll receive that, as well as any reaction marker that's on the charge model cannot use their reaction. So that's what the benefit of charge is. Now what happens if she had rolled a 5, which was what she needed in order to succeed? If the brute had still rolled a 7 or something like that, you take the higher between the two of being successful, and so the brute would still succeed in the charge. But if she had rolled a 5 and the brute had rolled a 3, she would win, and therefore he would just have a normal charge, but would actually lose his bonus die, and she would still be able to react. Page 38 talks about climbing and falling as part of your movement action. So let's say this settler is trying to climb up this tower in order to gain a height advantage. So once she is here, or as part of her movement, you can climb 1 less range ruler from your regular movement. So 1 less from yellow is orange, and so that's basically the height of this tower. But as part of her movement, before she moves, she needs to make an agility test, which is 4, to determine whether or not she can even climb. And she does succeed, and so she's able to move up an orange level and would be able to go in here. If she fails, she's wasted her action and she's unable to climb, or if she was already midway up, she would fall down and take falling damage. The falling damage chart is here on page 39, and you just calculate by rolling a black die and then adding based off of the height in which they have fallen. But they are allowed to jump down. If you do jump down, you basically can do 1 less range ruler based off of falling, and anything that jumps down from orange or lower takes no damage. Now let's talk about quick actions. So finally we get to what these cogs mean that you see here as well as here. So even though you fail to hit, you still get an action point if you roll that. So what happens is when you're making a check or a roll, and if the cog comes up, not only does it count as 1, but you also get an action point. And so you can grab one of these, and you need to immediately spend that action point during your turn, because all of these action points go away after your turn is over for that model. And most models will choose, based off of their card, what action they want to do, and in this case you look at the white circles. what they are able to do. So action point use icons are here on page 40. If they have this, they can spend an action to make an immediate movement, a quick action. They can make an attack. They can use an expertise such as computers, lockpick, search, or presence. And then finally, they can prepare, which is using the reaction marker here. So here we see that Dogmeat, whenever he rolls one of these cogs, he can choose to use that action point to have a reaction marker placed on his unit, or he can choose to move, both regular move or to charge. There are limitations though to quick actions, where any skill test that you roll using a quick action gets a -2 modifier to the skill value. Also, quick actions that require movement use a range ruler one color shorter than usual. So if Dogmeat chooses to do a normal move, instead of going orange or red, he would go yellow. A lot of the times when you use an action point, you're going to choose to prepare, or you can actually choose to prepare as a regular action. But whenever I roll a cog, the default that I choose, especially for these beginning models, since all of them have that ability, is to place a reaction marker on them. So let's say she rolled a cog and used her action point or just a regular action to put a reaction marker on there. How reaction markers work is that they respond to triggers, and you can choose whatever trigger you want. You don't have to declare ahead of time, but you look at the range of your perception, and if they are within one length of that range, any activity allows you to react to them. Or if a friendly model is hit by an attack, you can also react to them. 2 lengths away, only movement will trigger your reaction or a direct attack against you. So in this circumstance with Nora, let's say she does have a reaction marker. Her reaction range is a black. And so let's say, which is plenty over here, but let's say he attacks somebody and he's within line of sight. She is able to react to him. Or another common reaction is, let's say they don't have line of sight, and as soon as he moves here within line of sight, she may choose to shoot at him. Or he will resolve his movement, but she will shoot at him when he's over here so that she doesn't get the minus to using her ranged weapon in melee. Another action that you can use is to throw an item, and items that you can throw will be signified by the grenade, and it will show on the card that that item can only be thrown because the range ruler won't have a color but will have the grenade item on them. You'll need to look at the card and see what ability they use in order to throw items. Some units are unable to throw, so for example over here the settler does not have a grenade, and so they're not able to wield or throw items like grenades, but Nora can. Obviously Dogmeat isn't going to be throwing anything. So let's say Nora has these fragmentation grenades, and so her range of throwing is green. And so let's go up here. Let's say Nora is right here, and she is within green of this mutant. She is able to throw her grenade, and she will roll it with a black and a yellow, and will need her, here it's on her agility, so 6. And so she would fail because she did not roll what she needed to. Let's go ahead and resolve failed throws, because at that point they will scatter. So let's skip over to 47 and look at what happens when they scatter. So the scatter rules basically show what happens when you miss. The first thing you want to do is look at your thrown weapon and see if it does have a scatter marker, which is this white one with the arrows going around. If that is true, when you miss, you look at how much you missed by. So Nora needed 6 in order to succeed. She rolled an 8. That's a difference of 2. So it scatters an orange distance away. So you grab the orange marker, and to determine which direction, you use the advantage marker, and you just flip it, and that's the direction that it moves. And so if it was centered on this character, the direction is that it lands right here, so I'll just use this as a marker of where it lands. an orange distance away, and it explodes here. If you look at the card, you'll see that this is filled in with orange. That is the diameter of the explosion. So any model that is caught within that diameter, centered here on that location, would take 2 points of damage, as indicated here. What this means is if it was successful, the model that was targeted would also take another point of damage for 3 total, whereas any collateral damage would only take 2. Had Nora succeeded and landed it squarely on him, he would have taken 3 points of damage, but all of his friends are further away than the diameter of the explosion. If he, for some reason, was really close like this, he would take 2 points because he's within the diameter and would have gotten caught up in the explosion. Turn back to page 45, and it talks a little bit about power armor. The thing to know about power armor, again, is that it gets this bonus of a plus. Here on page 46 talks about advanced weapons, talks about mines, again, a diameter of area effect weapons, which we talked about already, heavy weapons, slow firing weapons, and how much time it takes to use those. Again, make sure you look at your cards to see whether or not they're able to use those items. So the super mutants are allowed to use heavy weapons, but the settlers are not, since they do, except for Nora has it here. But the settlers here, the survivors, do not have that icon, so are unable to use them. Next, page 47 talks about primed weapons, that some weapons can only be used once it's primed, and each card will dictate what the conditions are in order to gain a marker, and so the Deathclaw needs 3 markers before it can be used. It talks about walked fire, which is basically like a machine gun. You can repeatedly shoot multiple times in a shoot action with walked fire weapons, and it will have a marker indicating the number of times that it can be shot. This section ends with page 48 and the multiple conditions that can be assigned, or effects that a unit can have on it, and the impact of it. And I'll go ahead and let you read through that on your own. Pause here and go to tutorial number 4 to practice the things that you learned in this section. Now we get to the final section of the rule book, and it starts off talking about advanced units and models. Again, I'm not going to go into all of the details of that. You can read through that on your own. Talks about factions, faction abilities also, turrets, fixed defenses, the dog in particular. Talks about luck. So luck is represented by this icon, and some cards will give you a luck token. All you do is grab one of them, and whenever you use a luck token, you just flip it, and that would be a fail. But if it lands this way, that would be a success. You can use it, for example, when you miss on a roll to hit. It gives you a -2 modifier, so if you missed by 2 points, that would provide a hit. You can dodge and use it as a way of giving you a +2 modifier to the attacker's roll when they're trying to hit you, so you can force them to miss that way. Taking damage, you can get extra criticals. Again, go ahead and read those on your own. Here we see the section explaining critical attacks. So there's 2 ways that you get critical points to use on your weapons. If you notice, on most weapons, you're going to see on the right hand side a critical meter and the effects that it has. How you gain these tokens to place on them and keep track of how many points you have is, first, if I were to use a hunting rifle and I successfully hit another model just with a regular attack, I don't even need to damage them. I automatically get a CP and I place it on here. The other way also is when I roll, and I roll one of the exclamation points, I get a CP, and I will instantly put that, again, on my tracker. So let's say that this weapon, the hunting rifle, finally gains 3 CPs. The next action that I use to fire the weapon, I can choose to, I don't have to, but I can choose to use the fully charged effect. When you choose to use fully charged effect, you're spending all of your CPs for that weapon, so you remove those. You do not roll the 2 hit die, the white die, because it's an automatic hit. And what you do is you just roll. If it's within short distance, you would roll the yellow dice. If it's within long distance, you would roll the green dice. And it does 4 points of damage for a successful hit versus the 2. If you look over here at the 10mm pistol, not only would you roll the black and the green, you would also roll an additional black die and a yellow die. Again, not the white die because it's an automatic hit, and it would still do only 2 points of damage. So you're rolling 2 black die, which increases the chances of doing more damage. Once you spend your CPs, you start racking them up again in subsequent rounds, exactly the same way as you did before. And that is it. You have almost all of the rules, so go ahead and play the last tutorial mission. You will be able to use everything that's in the rule book. There are more rules that are found in the quest book, but I'm not going to be going through those, but you can look at those on your own. It talks about the settlement, building a settlement. It talks about how to do co-op mode, solo mode. AI, there's a whole section on AI cards and how to use those. But again, I'll let you look at those on your own. So what do I think about Fallout Wasteland Warfare? I do tend to like more streamlined, simpler games. If you haven't seen my video on the comparison between Dead Zone and Kill Team, go ahead and click here and you'll see that I like sort of streamlined and fast play games. Having said that, I really do like this game, even though it has a bunch of rules and is relatively fiddly because there's tons of components and little chits that you have to keep track of. But I like how the dice resolves combat. It's just the 2-hit roll along with all the modifier dice, and then you get to roll the red defense die. And that's it. That's how you resolve combat. And I like that. I like that you can ready an action. I like that you can react. Also, the other thing that we didn't get into is that I do like the campaign that they have set up, as well as the settlement rules. So if you have played any of the computer RTS games like StarCraft, it's that kind of component built in where you have to create a settlement and build the right buildings in order to gain new upgrades. I also like the fact that Modiphius put all of their cards and files online and you can download them for free. So every single unit that they have available, you can download these cards and build factions and armies. And you can proxy these miniatures with any of the miniatures that you already have or other miniatures that you might have sort of in the apocalyptic range. The reason why I really like that is because honestly the miniatures are more expensive than they should be. Even though I do like the miniatures, even though it fits really well with the video game, so if you're really into the IP of Fallout, you're going to really like this game. But the miniatures are pretty pricey, so I'm either going to wait until they go on sale, which inevitably I'm hoping that they will, or in the meantime I'm just going to proxy the many miniatures that I already have to play this game. It is a good game. I do recommend it. I think the rules are written really well and they are easy to learn, and Modiphius's website has a running FAQ. And I really appreciate that a lot. As you know, I really like well-written rules, and it is pretty clear, and their FAQ that they have online really answers any questions that you might have. And so go ahead and get this game. I highly do recommend it.